Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me this afternoon. I am Angel Flores, International External Affairs Manager at World Animal Protection. Essentially, what I do is that I support our different campaigns when it comes to stakeholder and political engagement. And today, I will be talking about harnessing systems change to create a better world for animals. And how I'll do this is that I'll give you an overview of our strategy to 2030, and then we'll have a look and zoom in at factory farming and our food systems and what we're doing in that space. And we'll end with a short video showing our work at COP27. So let me introduce our organization. World Animal Protection was founded in the 1950s. So this is the origin or the roots of World Animal Protection. And we've campaigned for decades to create lasting change for animals, whether that's outlawing bullfighting in certain parts of the world and saving animals from cruelty and suffering across different industries, and using them in entertainment and so on. But as World Society for the Protection of Animals, or WISPA, as most of you may know, World Animal Protection, we began lobbying the European Union in the 1980s, and we were given consultative status with the UN in 1981, and by the 1990s had been represented at the Council of Europe. And our mission, essentially, like many of you in this room, is to create a better world for animals. So you will see, I just put there a map of where we are in terms of our offices. But of course, the work, like many of your organizations as well, transcend these borders when we work in partnership with others. So, this shows our strategic vision to 2030. And as you will see, it's unified, it's focused, and at scale. And we are putting our undivided attention to two key goals. The first one is ensuring farmed animals live good lives by transforming the global food system. And second is to stop wild animals from being cruelly exploited as commodities by changing the systems that allow this. So in short, goal one is ending factory farming, and goal two is ending the wildlife trade. And we are taking on these two global systems because these are the biggest systems that fuel animal abuse. So why are we focusing on these two very big, ambitious goals? So we all know that there is a deepening crisis facing animals around the world, and its scale is really alarming. If we don't act now as a collective, and if we don't stop animal cruelty in its tracks, it will be too late, and we will reach the point of no return. So what we've seen from the COVID-19 pandemic, it's a reminder that human and animal health and welfare are interlinked, and practices that undermine animals' well-being have negative consequences for humans too. So while we may not know the full extent of the origins of the pandemic, it is again a reminder to take stock of how animals are treated by humans. So let's look at the numbers that we're grappling with. This is the problem that we're trying to solve as a movement. At least 1.6 trillion wild animals are killed and suffer through people's actions every year. And more than 80 billion land-based farm animals are consumed annually, and most are cruelly confined to industrial low-welfare systems. The numbers vary depending on the estimates, but roughly around 70 to 80% are said to belong or to be confined within the factory farming systems. The 80 billion number doesn't include our aquaculture and fisheries, and other non-land-based animals at that. So right now, what we can see is that we live in a world where the food system is broken. Billions of farmed animals are seen as cogs in a machine. They are seen as nothing more than commodities, not living beings who feel pain and fear. The trade in wild animals is one of the biggest money spinners on the planet. Trillions of wild animals are killed, trafficked, or exploited every year for nothing more than greed and profit. So these global challenges that we face today, whether that's escalating pandemic risks, climate change, biodiversity loss, food insecurity, are complex and interrelated, and they all have one thing in common. That's animals. Thus, it is more important than ever to take a systems change approach to create a better world for them. So let's now zoom into the factory farming industry. And why are we talking about this at the Asia for Animals conference? So we know that Asia, in terms of our societal economic status, more and more people are becoming middle-income families and households at that. And this means with rising incomes, the demand for meat also increases. And right now, Asia is already said to be the largest meat-producing region at 45%. So when we look at the numbers here, the projection to 2030 is that meat consumption will grow in Asia and the Pacific to around 18%. So it is a timely discussion, and we need to, as I said earlier, really tackle factory farming and these similar systems that create cruelty and suffering. So when we say that we are at a crisis point, it's really no exaggeration. The global factory farming industry is a uniquely damaging triple threat. So I'd like you to remember these three things about the industry. So first, it is the single biggest source of animal cruelty on the planet. Driven by our desire for affordable meat and dairy products, these billions of animals are used for farming, and over 3/4, as I mentioned earlier, are trapped in really cruel conditions. So these animals are manufactured and processed as products and forced to live in very unnatural environments, enduring extreme physical and psychological suffering. And the scale of suffering is alarming, and its very existence should shock and shame us. But it is doing also untold damage to our planet. Second, factory farming is the single greatest cause of wildlife habitat destruction in the world. The crops required to feed these suffering animals now dominate the world's land use. The vast majority, nearly 80% of soy produced globally, is grown to feed animals instead of humans. So 1/3 of land used to grow cereals is also used for livestock. So factory farming as an industry, which is positioned by corporates as a way to feed the world, is actually undermining food security in the way that animal feed is produced. The devastating link between animal farming and deforestation is very well understood, but when we combine those numbers, the land used for animal farming plus the land used for animal feed, that accounts for 77% of global farming land. That's how big it is. So this disastrous combination that we are now witnessing is not even enabling people to shift to more plant-based diets, but rather it is just fueling our appetite for cheap meat. And the third thing to highlight when it comes to the industry is that it is a massive contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Already, the global food system is approximately contributing 1/3 of the global GHG emissions, and this footprint is set to grow. So the demand for meat is rising fast, paving the way for further factory farming expansion. Back in 1970, global beef production was roughly the same as chicken and pork combined, but with factory farming's growth, the most intensively farmed species, chicken and pork, are expected to produce at levels triple that of beef by 2050. Not only does this mean greater climate impact, but this means billions more animals, farmed animals, condemned to cruelty and suffering. So without action on global meat consumption, rising demand for animal feed, this will see us consume the remaining carbon budget left that's necessary to keep our temperatures to safe levels, 1.5 to 2 degrees by 2050. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change even said that even if we stopped fossil fuels immediately tomorrow, we will not be able to reach the Paris Agreement goals without doing anything about our food system. So this is our food systems campaign and strategy, essentially. And you will see it in 3 main parts. Apologies, the text is quite small, but happy to share. I'll share my email at the end of the presentation. What we're really saying here is that we would like to do 3 key things. The first one is ensuring that there is no future for factory farming. How do we do that? It's by exposing the harms of the system on animals, people, and the planet to build public opposition and pursuing disruption opportunities to constrain its growth. And an example is our work on climate. Second is triggering a food revolution. So speaking about the industry is one thing, but as we've heard in the earlier presentation around the dog meat trade, there needs to be a transition for people involved in this industry. What does that transition look like for producers as well as for consumers? So that food revolution will be key. How do we address the obstacles to growth of humane and sustainable food systems and ensure animals that are still remaining within the factory farming system will eventually have less cruelty within those farms as the transition happens? We know that the transition will not happen overnight. And finally, we're looking at financing, pushing for a fair finance system that ends private and public finance that goes into factory farming and redirecting that money instead to grow and to flourish humane and sustainable food systems. So just picked here 3 studies that we've recently done as World Animal Protection and with partners like the Stop Financing Factory Farming, just to illustrate how we're trying to attack a single problem through different lenses. The first one being finance, and really looking at development banks like the World Bank and telling them, oh, you've actually been funding animal cruelty, climate disaster, and so on through reports like the Climate Misalignment Report. The second one is focusing on more of the factory farming and public health angle, looking at antimicrobial resistance. And the last one is around the climate change work and linking animal cruelty to that. So how do we drive change? So this presentation is entitled "Harnessing Systems Change." It's not to say that what we'd like to say actually is that both incremental and systemic changes have their place in addressing complex problems and making improvements. So it's a matter of like balancing the short-term improvements with long-term systemic transformation. And we see this as an effective way to achieve lasting positive outcomes. As an organization, though, since 2020, we've decided to focus our energies and our resources on the systemic side of change, so that in disrupting these systems and constraining their growth, we're able to see billions more animals not being bred to suffer within these systems and conditions. As much as we may wish it to be at the moment, animal welfare is not yet the core issue at the global agenda. It falls behind things like climate change, human health, transmissible disease, hunger, and food insecurity. But herein lies an opportunity for us as a movement, though. As we see the way that these issues intersect with animal welfare, we can then use that to engage different decision makers, policy makers, and so on. So the way in which the world produces and consumes food is central to each of these different global priorities, and the welfare of farmed animals is actively shaped by these actions. So finally, just wanted to share this slide, which looks at what are the changes that we seek when we say systems change. So the world that we see, this is the change that we want to see by 2030. First is that public and private finance divest from factory farming, that they'll consider this as a risky investment for them, and instead invest in humane and sustainable proteins. Second is that society no longer trusts factory farming, and that we don't see it as necessary to feed the world. Governments imposing a moratorium on factory farms. So this is what we're doing within our climate work. The food industry prioritizes humane and sustainable diets, and that people choose healthier diets. So that's really the six key outcomes that we'd like to see. And before I end, I'd like to show you a quick video for the last 3 minutes on our COP27 asks, just to give you an illustration of what we're doing at the global level to really create this focus on factory farming, really make industrial agribusiness corporations involved in this accountable for their pollution and their actions and the cruelty they're creating for the billions of animals in this system. So let me see. Just get some help from the staff. Thank you. Sound?
Protection is calling on countries to publicly recognize that factory farming through an extensive deforestation driven by animal feed production is a major contributor to climate change. Additionally, we are asking for regulations to be tightened to prevent deforestation in animal feed production and imported products, including animal feed, meat, and dairy.
World Animal Protection is calling for high per capita meat consumption countries to adopt the goal to halve global animal protein production and consumption by 2040 and support a just protein transition to reverse the destructive impact of land use changes and deforestation caused by global factory farming and feed production.
World Animal Protection is calling for countries to stop further expansion of factory farming by committing to a 10-year moratorium on new factory farms to enable food justice, food security, greenhouse gas reduction, and biodiversity protection.
Thank you so much. So just some final remarks. So these goals are really bold and ambitious, and achieving them will benefit huge numbers of animals and enable us to position animal welfare as a priority issue within the broader sustainability, food security, and climate emergency agendas. The challenges we face in the realm of animal welfare, animal protection can sometimes seem so insurmountable, but I firmly believe that together we can make a profound difference. By working together, we can amplify our influence, challenge the status quo, and drive real transformative change. Together, we can be a force for good, creating a better world, not just for animals, but for all of us who share this planet. Thank you, everyone.
All right, we will now open question and answer session for Ms. Angel. Are there any questions? So none. Thank you again, Ms. Angel. Wait, sorry.
Okay.
All right, please continue.
So, hi Angel, great talk. Thank you very much. So, I would like just to ask you that you mentioned multiple accreditations that World Animal Protection has, and I was just wondering how important is getting accreditations to these institutions and organizations are to organizations in Asia, for example, and what will WIP expect as an accredited organizations to happen at COP28?
Yeah, so I think the accreditation within these different platforms is a way for us to really get our voices into the global agenda. And given that as I mentioned earlier, animal welfare is not yet the core issue that's being discussed. And so we need to find the intersectionality of our issue across different spaces and constituencies. So that's what we're currently doing now at World Animal Protection. For example, at the COPs talking about climate change, we have entered that discussion, but part of the Allies engagement strategy is to work with the climate movement and really raising the visibility of our issues as a movement to that climate space so that they themselves can advocate for us when they have these 1 minute time slot and speaking to the different governments. So I'd like to share with you that in Bonn this year at the climate talks, World Animal Protection has been given a chance to speak as a constituency under the environmental NGOs. And there we've been able to talk about animal welfare, and that is already for us at least a step towards the right direction. Yeah. Yeah, and with that, thank you again. And yeah, I think they're ready to start the next one.
All right, thank you.